Welcome back, horror lovers, to BitBlitz Horror. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale of ancient artifacts and cosmic terrors, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories. Now, let's dim the lights and plunge into a world where reality bends and nightmares come alive. Are you ready? The Obsidian Whisper, Chapter 1, The Discovery. The crisp mountain air filled Ethan's lungs as he led his friends along the narrow trail. The dense forest surrounding them seemed to pulse with life, birds chirping and leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. It was a perfect day for hiking, and the group of 5 friends had been looking forward to this trip for months. "How much further, Ethan?" called out Lisa from the back of the group, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Ethan consulted the map on his phone. "Should be just around this bend. There's supposed to be an amazing view of the valley." As they rounded the corner, the trees opened up to reveal a breathtaking vista. The small town of Pine Hollow lay nestled in the valley below, surrounded by towering peaks and lush forests. The friends paused to take in the sight, snapping photos and pointing out landmarks. It was Jake who first noticed something odd. "Hey guys, check this out," he called, gesturing to a small clearing just off the main trail. The others gathered around, curious. In the center of the clearing stood a weathered stone altar, its surface covered in strange, intricate carvings. Resting atop the altar was a small, black figurine, no larger than a chess piece. "What is that?" whispered Amanda, leaning in for a closer look. Ethan reached out to pick up the figurine, but Lisa grabbed his wrist. "Wait. We don't know what it is. Maybe we shouldn't touch it," Jake scoffed. "Come on, it's just some old trinket. Probably left behind by other hikers." Ignoring Lisa's protests, Ethan picked up the figurine. It was heavier than it looked, and seemed to be made of polished obsidian. As he turned it over in his hand, he could have sworn he felt a faint pulse, like a tiny heartbeat. "This is incredible," Ethan murmured. "We should take it back to town, show it to Dr. Reeves at the museum. He might know what it is." The 5th member of their group, Michael, had been unusually quiet. Now he spoke up, his voice low and uneasy. "I don't know, guys. Something about this place feels wrong. Maybe we should leave it here." But curiosity had already taken hold. Despite Michael and Lisa's reservations, the group decided to take the figurine with them. As they continued their hike back to town, none of them noticed the way the forest seemed to grow quieter, or how the shadows seemed to lengthen and deepen around them. Chapter 2, The First Signs. Dr. Reeves peered at the obsidian figurine through his magnifying glass, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Fascinating," he muttered. "I've never seen anything quite like it." Ethan and his friends had brought the artifact to the Pine Hollow Museum of Natural History as soon as they returned from their hike. Dr. Reeves, the museum's curator and the town's resident expert on local history and archaeology, had been immediately intrigued. "The craftsmanship is exquisite," Dr. Reeves continued. "And these markings, they don't match any known culture from this region. Where did you say you found this?" Ethan described the stone altar and its location. Dr. Reeves listened intently, his excitement growing. "This could be a major discovery," he said. "I'd like to organize an expedition to the site as soon as possible. In the meantime, I'd like to keep the figurine here for further study, if that's all right with you." The friends agreed, and left the museum feeling a mix of excitement and unease. As they walked down Main Street, they noticed a few townspeople giving them strange looks. "Is it just me, or is everyone acting weird?" Amanda whispered. Jake shrugged. "Small town, big discovery. News probably travels fast around here." That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he found himself unable to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the obsidian figurine, its smooth surface seeming to ripple and shift like liquid darkness. When he finally drifted off, His dreams were filled with whispers in a language he couldn't understand and shadowy figures that lurked just out of sight. He awoke the next morning feeling drained, as if he hadn't slept at all. As he stumbled to the bathroom, he caught a glimpse of something in the corner of his eye, a dark, fluid-like substance that seemed to ooze down the wall. But when he turned to look directly at it, it was gone. Ethan shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs from his mind. He must be more tired than he thought. As the days passed, strange occurrences began to multiply. Residents reported vivid nightmares similar to Ethan's. Pets started to go missing, only to reappear days later, behaving erratically. Mrs. Johnson's usually friendly golden retriever now growled at anyone who approached, its eyes seeming to glow with an unnatural light. The town's vegetation began to wither and die, replaced by bizarre, alien-looking plants that seemed to grow overnight. Thick vines with pulsating pods crept up the sides of buildings, and strange, fleshy flowers bloomed in gardens, their petals opening to reveal what looked disturbingly like tiny, gnashing teeth. Chapter 3: The Spreading Corruption. A week after the discovery of the figurine, Ethan and his friends met at the local diner, their faces drawn and tired. None of them had been sleeping well, plagued by the same nightmares that seemed to be affecting the entire town. "We have to do something," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This all started when we brought that thing back from the mountains." Jake, who had been the most enthusiastic about the discovery, now looked pale and shaken. "I saw something last night," he admitted. "In my backyard. It was like a shadow, but it moved. And it had eyes." The others shared similar stories. Amanda had woken up to find her bedroom ceiling crawling with strange symbols that faded away when she turned on the light. Michael had been hearing whispers coming from his walls, speaking in that same unknown language from their dreams. "We need to take it back," Ethan said firmly. "We'll go to the museum, get the figurine, and return it to where we found it." They all nodded in agreement, relief evident on their faces. But when they arrived at the museum, they found the doors locked and the windows dark. A sign on the door read, "Closed for renovations," but they could see no signs of any work being done. "This doesn't make sense," Ethan muttered. "Dr. Reeves didn't mention any renovations." They peered through the windows, trying to catch a glimpse of the figurine, but the interior was shrouded in darkness. As they were about to leave, Michael let out a startled gasp. "Look!" In one of the windows, barely visible, was a handprint. But it wasn't a normal handprint, it seemed to be made of the same black, oily substance that Ethan had glimpsed in his bathroom. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "We need to get in there," he said. After a few minutes of searching, they found a back door that had been left unlocked. The interior of the museum was pitch black, and their flashlights seemed to barely penetrate the darkness. As they made their way through the exhibits, they noticed that many of the displays had been covered with sheets, as if to hide them from view. When they reached Dr. Reeves' office, they found it in disarray. Papers were strewn everywhere, and strange symbols had been scrawled on the walls in what looked disturbingly like blood. The Obsidian figurine sat on the desk, seeming to absorb the light from their flashlights. "Let's get out of here," Amanda whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan reached for the figurine, but as soon as his fingers touched its surface, a jolt of energy surged through him. He stumbled back, gasping for air. The others crowded around him, concerned. "I'm okay," he managed to say. "But we need to get this thing back to where it came from." Now, Chapter 4: The Vanishing Trail. The drive up to the trailhead was tense and silent. The town seemed different somehow, the streets eerily empty, the few people they saw hurrying along with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. As they neared the edge of town, Ethan could have sworn he saw something massive moving through the trees, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. When they reached the parking lot, they found it deserted. The information board that usually displayed trail maps and safety information was now covered in the same strange symbols they had seen in Dr. Reeves' office. "Does anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They all nodded, scanning the tree line nervously. The forest seemed darker than it should be, the shadows deeper and more menacing. As they started up the trail, Ethan felt a growing sense of wrongness, as if the very landscape was shifting around them. After an hour of hiking, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. The trail that had led them to the altar was gone, replaced by dense underbrush and unfamiliar terrain. Even the mountains looked different, their peaks twisted into impossible shapes that hurt the eyes to look at directly. "This is impossible," Jake muttered, consulting his GPS. "According to this, we're not even on the mountain anymore. But that can't be right." As they pushed deeper into the forest, the vegetation began to change. The normal trees and plants gave way to bizarre, alien flora. Pulsating vines wrapped around tree trunks, and large, fleshy flowers emitted a sickly sweet odor that made them dizzy. Suddenly, Michael let out a strangled cry. The others turned to see him pointing at something on the ground. It was a patch of that same black, oily substance they had seen in the museum. But this patch was moving, slowly creeping along the forest floor like some kind of sentient slime. "We need to go back," Michael said, his voice shaking. "We can't stay here." But as they turned to retrace their steps, they realized with growing horror that the path behind them had changed. Where there had been a clear trail, there was now only a tangled mass of those pulsating vines, writhing and twisting as if alive. They were lost in a forest that seemed to be actively working against them, with no idea how to find their way back to town or to the altar where they had found the figurine. And all the while, the obsidian artifact pulsed in Ethan's backpack, its otherworldly energy growing stronger with each passing moment. Chapter 5: The Disappearances. As night fell, the group huddled together in a small clearing, too afraid to sleep. The forest around them came alive with strange sounds, whispers, chittering noises, and occasionally, something that sounded disturbingly like distant, inhuman screams. "We need to keep moving," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "We can't stay here." But as they gathered their things, they realized with growing horror that Amanda was missing. One moment she had been sitting with them, and the next she was gone, without a sound. "Amanda!" Lisa called out, her voice echoing unnaturally in the twisted forest. "Amanda, where are you?" They searched frantically, calling her name and shining their flashlights into the darkness. But there was no sign of her, no response to their calls. The only trace they found was a small patch of that black, oily residue on the ground where she had been sitting. Panic set in as they realized the true danger of their situation. They were lost in a forest that defied the laws of nature, with some unknown force picking them off one by one. The obsidian figurine in Ethan's backpack seemed to grow heavier, its pulsing energy more insistent. As they stumbled through the darkness, the forest around them continued to change. The trees began to twist and warp, their bark taking on a texture that looked disturbingly like human skin. The ground beneath their feet became soft and yielding, as if they were walking on flesh rather than earth. One by one, the others disappeared. Jake vanished while they were crossing a stream that flowed with what looked like black ink. Lisa simply faded away before their eyes, her body becoming transparent until there was nothing left but a faint outline that dissipated like smoke. In the end, only Ethan and Michael remained, clinging to each other as they navigated the nightmarish landscape. The sky above them had turned a sickly green, with what looked like vast tentacles writhing among the clouds. "What's happening, Ethan?" Michael whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "What have we unleashed?" Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath them began to shake. A vast chasm opened up, revealing a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to stretch down into infinity. Michael lost his footing and slipped, barely managing to grab onto the edge of the chasm. Ethan reached for his friend, but as their hands touched, he felt Michael's fingers turn to that same black oil. With a look of utter despair, Michael dissolved before Ethan's eyes, his body melting away into the darkness below. Chapter 6: The Eldritch Truth. Alone and terrified, Ethan stumbled through the twisted landscape, the obsidian figurine now burning against his back through his backpack. He no longer knew if he was in the forest, the town, or somewhere else entirely. Reality itself seemed to be breaking down around him. As he walked, he began to see flashes of something. Visions that seared themselves into his mind. A vast, alien city of impossible geometry, its spires reaching into a sky filled with writhing tentacles and eyes that blinked in and out of existence. Creatures of unimaginable horror, their forms constantly shifting and changing, existing in multiple dimensions at once. And at the center of it all, a being of such cosmic terror that Ethan's mind recoiled from the very thought of it. An ancient entity, sealed away eons ago by a forgotten civilization. The obsidian figurine had been its prison, and now it was free. With this realization came understanding. The figurine wasn't just an artifact, it was a key, a seal that had kept this eldritch horror contained. By removing it from its resting place, they had weakened the barriers between worlds, allowing this entity to begin seeping into their reality. Ethan fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what they had done. The town, his friends, perhaps the entire world, all of it was being consumed by this otherworldly corruption. And it was their fault. But with this understanding came a glimmer of hope. If the figurine was the key, perhaps it could also be used to reseal the horror. But how? As if in response to his thoughts, Ethan felt a pull from the figurine. It was guiding him, he realized, back to where it all began. With renewed determination, Ethan pushed forward. The landscape continued to shift and change around him, but now he could see a pattern in the chaos. He was no longer lost, he was being led. Chapter 7: The Final Confrontation. After what felt like hours or perhaps days, time had lost all meaning. Ethan found himself back at the stone altar where they had first discovered the figurine. But it was no longer the peaceful clearing he remembered. The altar now stood at the center of a vast, pulsating mass of flesh and tentacles. The sky above had split open, revealing a void filled with stars that moved and blinked like living things. And emerging from this tear in reality was the entity itself, a being of such cosmic horror that Ethan's mind struggled to comprehend its form. As Ethan approached the altar, he felt the full weight of the entity's attention fall upon him. Its consciousness pressed against his mind, threatening to overwhelm him with visions of madness and despair. But Ethan pushed back, clinging to his humanity, to his memories of his friends and the world as it should be. With trembling hands, he removed the obsidian figurine from his backpack. The moment the figurine touched the altar, a surge of energy pulsed through the clearing. The entity roared, a sound that existed not in the air but in Ethan's mind, threatening to shatter his sanity. Ethan pressed the figurine into the indent on the altar where they had first found it. As he did, knowledge flooded his mind, ancient words in a language never meant for human tongues. Without fully understanding, he began to chant, his voice growing stronger with each syllable. The entity thrashed and writhed, its form beginning to warp and distort. The tear in the sky started to close, the stars blinking out one by one. The flesh-like landscape began to recede, normal trees and earth reasserting themselves. But it wasn't enough. Ethan could feel the entity fighting back, its